ask his commanders for a vote. They're going to vote on these two things, either this or that. Okay, he's going to ask his commanders for a vote. The vote is, we're either going to retreat back to Washington, D.C., or we're going to stand and fight the Confederates to the very end. So Meade gets his commanders together that night after the second day. They talk about how the day is gone. Obviously, they must have talked about casualties and those types of things. And then Meade says, I want to take a vote among my officers. Are we going to retreat back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow? Or are we going to stand and fight the Confederates to the very end? Now, why would he do that? Historians give two reasons of why he would actually put that to a vote. Do most commanders put that? You think General Lee's putting things to a vote over there? Why would he do that? They said, why would he do that?
Because if he makes it a vote and the generals and all the soldiers are actually wanting to stay and fight, then they'll fight a lot harder than if they want to retreat.
He's very close. Some historians say that Meade might have been consensus building, which is on your ID sheet. And Mason hit it pretty close. Consensus building is if you're going to make a major decision, you want to get everybody to buy in. Because if they all buy in, they're going to probably perform better. Coaches are the best consensus builders there are. Don't they spend all their time explaining to you, giving you a little bit of say, how this is how we're going to win the state championship, this is how we're going to do this, this is how we're going to do that. And they hope the players buy in. You try to get players to buy in. Because if I have an idea and you don't like it, if I say we're going to do this, and everybody in here is against it, and I do it anyway, how's that going to work for me? Not very good. But if I tell you a concept I have, like I'm going to take you to the Battle of Little Bighorn, do you guys want to go? And you all say, yeah, I really want to go. Is it going to be a better trip than if I say we're going and you're paying for everything? And I mean, you see what I'm saying? So consensus building is one of the reasons why historians think Meade did that. What would be the opposite of that? Why would he vote on that? Consensus building would be to make a choice. Well, close. He was afraid of the possible result. Historians say one reason he put it up to a vote, as you kind of mentioned, he was afraid to make that decision by himself because he might be responsible for the deaths of many, many soldiers. So he wanted somebody else to take some responsibility for it too. So historians say that Meade's decision for a vote came from either consensus building, which we talked about, or he was afraid of the possible result and didn't want to be the man responsible himself. Does that make sense? How do you think they voted? We know in history, they voted unanimously to stand and fight till the bitter end. Nobody voted the other way. Every commander voted to stand and fight the Confederates to the bitter end. Now, who do you think the Confederate morale is at the end of day 2? It actually is good. They still believe they've won both days, okay, because they're still on the offensive, right? They're not retreating. So actually, at the end of the second day, Confederates still believe they have won both days and that they have good morale. So we move to the third day, July 3rd, 1863. The Confederate morale's high. They believe they won the first 2 days. And General Lee makes the decision that we have got to have a decisive victory on day 3. If we kick butt on day 3 and have a decisive victory over the Union, this will secure the Civil War for the South. They will lose their will to fight, and we will have accomplished our goal. Is the South trying to turn the North into slavery? No. So if the South wins this Civil War, does the North live by the South's rules? No. We have 2 separate countries within the United States. One slave and one free. So he thinks that if he can get a decisive victory the next day, that he's going to have great opportunity. Okay, now I gave you a handout, did I not? With a kind of a diagram on it with your ID sheet. I'm sure I did. Hopefully I did. There you go. It says Robert E. Lee's 3-part strategy at Gettysburg. This is what we're talking about on day 3. And so I'll explain it to you. If you see a map in front of you, you may understand it better. Okay? So, General Lee has a threefold plan for July 3rd, 1863. I don't know what you need to write down. You can probably just jot it on your map. The first thing he's going to do, by virtue of your map, is he's going to attack the Union at what? Again, Culp's Hill. You see that on your map? Then what he's going to do is he's going to send Commander Jeb Stuart and 4,000 cavalrymen on a wide sweep attack into the rear of the Union troops that are stationed along the ridge. Can you kind of see what he's doing? He's going to hit Culp's Hill, then he's going to send a sweeping attack to the rear. Okay? And then what's the third thing he's going to do? He's going to assault the Union defense line at the center up through Cemetery Hill. He's going to march men straight at him. And what's he hoping that the sweeping does by Stuart? When Stuart comes around and attacks from the back, and he attacks from the front, that's going to do what? It's going to divide the Union lines. And he thinks he can get him to retreat. So he's got an attack on Culp's Hill because he still wants that hill to do what? Fire cannons at the Union. Then he's going to take Jeb Stuart and 4,000 cavalrymen on horses around the backside. He's going to make a big sweep attack to the rear of the Union troops and hit them from behind at the same place that the Union defense line is going to be hit by Confederate troops in the front. You kind of all see that three-part strategy? Pretty good strategy if it works. And he thinks if he splits these Union troops along their defense line, he'll force them to retreat back to D.C., and if they do, he wins this decisive victory, and we got two different countries in the United States. Well, Lee's plan begins at 5 a.m. on July 3rd, 1863. 5 a.m. is when this three-part strategy plan goes into effect. So what's happened first? Where are we advancing first? Culp's Hill. At Culp's Hill, the Union artillery, because what are they doing? They're shooting cannons, right? Just as battering the Confederate soldiers, causing a tremendous amount of havoc and carnage among the rebels. They're not doing real well at Culp's Hill. So at Culp's Hill, the Union artillery is battering the advancing Confederate soldiers, causing a lot of havoc and damage and death. And then Lee sets his sight at the center of the Union defense line at Cemetery Hill, and he has rebel cannons just firing like crazy along the ridge where he thinks the Union soldiers are. Okay? Now, I'm going to ask you a question. If you thought you were going to get cannon fired like crazy from the front of Cemetery Hill, where would you station your soldiers? You would, wouldn't you? Yeah, Brooke's exactly right. You'd have a back in here like crazy, hoping to protect them. Is that right? Now, the reason that he's throwing this cannon fire into Cemetery Hill is because he wants, first of all, to create a lot of Union casualties, right? His goal is to kill Union soldiers. And the second reason he's throwing this cannon fire up on Cemetery Hill is he wants to soften them up so that when he leads this massive infantry charge, that they're going to be in bad shape to try to defend themselves. You see what I'm saying? So it'd be like, I'm going to punch Hannah in the mouth over and over and over again because I want to really cause damage upon her, and I also want to get her softened up so when I bring 10 more people, she just says, I've had enough. Okay, that's the goal. The problem is that Meade outsmarted Lee on this deal. Because what Meade did is he had all of his soldiers hunkered down right on the lines. And Lee thought the same thing Brooke did, which was common sense. Yeah, I'll get my people back. I don't want to get them hammered. So where's Lee shooting these cannons? Over these Union soldiers. And he's not accomplishing any goal of killing Union soldiers or softening up these troops for his attack because they're not getting hit. So General Lee thought the Union troops on Cemetery Hill would be far back from the front of the ridge. Therefore, he fired cannons past that point. And he guessed wrong, as Union soldiers had hunkered down right on the front edge of Cemetery Hill, and these cannon shells hit harmlessly beyond the Union troops. So he did not gain anything. So far, how's his plan work? Not so good. Well, we'll go back to Culp's Hill. The Confederates are making just very little progress and tremendous loss of life. Just tremendous loss of life. And among the rebel casualties who dies at the hill that bears his family name is Wesley Culp. He loses his life on day 3, trying to take a hill that bared his family name. Now, Lee is not standing right next to Culp's Hill, so he has to assume that he is winning at Culp's Hill, so he begins phase 2 of his attack. What's phase 2? The cavalry is taking that far swing, and they're going to come back around and hit the lines. Now, this is kind of interesting. So General Lee orders Jeb Stuart and those 4,000 cavalry around Culp's Hill to strike at Union forces behind their defense line. And scouting for the Union in that area of the sweep was the Michigan cavalry under the command of Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer. So, scouting for the Union on the far edge of the battlefield, right in the area in which Jeb Stuart and those cavalrymen are going to try to make that sweep, the Michigan cavalry under the command of Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer is there. Guess how many men he has? 400 against 4,000. Okay? And you want to know where this guy got his reputation that's going to lead us into the Battle of Little Bighorn? Right here. Okay? So, Custer and his men are the only thing that stand between Stuart's cavalry and that Union's unprotected rear side. Okay? And so he's got 400 men. What's he going to do? He just goes nuts and he plunges all 400 of that cavalry into Stuart's men at a full gallop. And Stuart thinks, this guy's, it's like playing chicken, a semi and a bicycle. Stuart thinks that this guy's just bluffing, he's going to pull off at some time. He does not. He orders 400 cavalry straight into those 4,000 Confederate cavalry as fast as they can go. And they just hit. And when they hit, it causes an effect like when you hit the first one, you just stop and everybody goes boop, 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 right? And so he gets them confined, and what he does is he fights them off until he gets a few reinforcements, and Custer and his 400 Michigan cavalry stop Jeb Stuart from making that turn and getting behind Union lines. That's where George Custer got probably his most recognition at this point. So, we'll kind of go through that again. So, Jeb Stuart is certain that Custer's attack is just a bluff, that the Michigan cavalry will pull off their attack. He underestimates Custer as the Michigan cavalry dug in their spurs and charged forward at a full gallop. Custer then becomes reinforced with other cavalry, and Stuart's rear attack is stopped dead, and they retreat their position. Now, we're at 3 o'clock that day, and does Lee know that Stuart has been stopped? No. So he initiates phase 3 of the plan, which is to do what? Attack Cemetery Hill with 13,000 infantrymen. So at 3 o'clock p.m. that afternoon, General Lee initiates his final plan, unaware that Jeb Stuart and the Confederate cavalry is retreating. And he orders General George Pickett to lead a massive infantry charge of 13,000 men right at Cemetery Hill. Because he thinks he's winning at Culp's Hill. He thinks that Stuart is going to attack that rear, unprotected rear line of the Union. And so he sends George Pickett and 13,000 Confederates straight across a farm fields of a farm into Cemetery Hill. This charge will go down in American history as Picketts Charge. Picketts Charge. You know how long this Confederate line is, these 13,000 soldiers? 1 mile long. From here to here, they are marching 1 mile long. Now that's a lot of men. And are they all marching straight? They're marching inward to hit where? The center, where who was supposed to be hitting from the back end? Stewart. So they're not marching straight, these 13,000. They're marching an angle in because they all want to concentrate on the area where Stewart's coming back so they can split the lines in half. That's the idea. Well, who's on high ground? And what are they pounded into these guys? Cannon after cannon after cannon. The Union artillery is on high ground. Frank Haskell, the lieutenant we talked about before, is directing this fire. And the Union batters the Confederates with cannon fire from Cemetery Hill, causes mass destruction among the Confederates. Regardless of mass destruction, they continue to march. They got guys falling, they got 13,000 guys falling all over the place, but they do not give up, they continue to march. So regardless of the destruction that they are facing, the rebels show great courage and continue to march towards the ridge. And they come up to a fence. And when they get to this fence, they're going to be in range of each other shooting their rifles. So what have they faced up to that fence? Cannon fire. Once they get to this fence in the middle of that field, then they can engage with weapons, rifles, etc. The Confederates lost 50% of their men to get to that fence. So despite the 50% casualties to get to that fence, they continue to march past the fence towards Cemetery Hill. Despite the fact they've lost 50% of the 13,000, they continue to march. Well, the Union soldiers can't believe it, so what do? They panic and begin to retreat. Okay? These Union soldiers up on Cemetery Hill are watching these crazy Confederates, even though they're mowing them down at a 50% rate, they're still coming, and they panic and start to retreat. Well, Haskell, Lieutenant Haskell we've talked about, orders them to get back to their skirmish lines and fight. And Union reinforcements from other side, from along this ridge, concentrate in on Cemetery Hill. And now the rebels are boxed in from where? 3 sides, right? So you see what they're doing? They're just coming like this and around and getting, because they're trying to get this one particular line, right? So these Union reinforcements are just moving to the same point. And all of a sudden the rebels are boxed in from 3 sides. Who are they waiting for to relieve them? Jeb Stuart, and he's not coming. So what do? Picketts Charge soon becomes Picketts Retreat. And they skedaddle back and try to make as much out of it as they can. So they fight gallantly to get to that fence. 50% casualties. They march past the fence. Union starts to panic. The ones right on Cemetery Hill, they start to panic and retreat. Who gets them together? Haskell. Reinforcements come, they pin these Confederates in, and Picketts Charge becomes Picketts Retreat. In a little over an hour of fighting, more than 50% of the rebels were killed, wounded, or captured. 50%. The ironic thing about this is, guess who owned that farm that these Confederates all lost their life on, that farmland? A freed slave. A freed slave owned that land.
So 50% of their force was that?
Of the 13,000 that charged, Picketts Charge,
Okay.
dead, wounded, or captured. So that pretty much ends the Battle of Gettysburg. And all in all, we'll talk about what happened. 50,000 soldiers from both sides were killed, wounded, or captured. 50,000. That's a ton of people. How many people live in Moreland? Yeah, 10 times the number of people of this town. Yeah, incredible. Now, think about this. What do you think the town of Gettysburg, we're not done yet, what do you think the town of Gettysburg looked like?
5.
Burned in ruins, crops, farmland, destroyed. Now picture this, you walk into Gettysburg after the battle. Town is burned and in ruins. You might be able to live with that. Valuable crops in the surrounding area are totally destroyed, farmland destroyed. The corpses of over 10,000 men litter both the streets of Gettysburg and the field that surround the town. Not to mention that on Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill, but just around the town of Gettysburg, a pretty little town that started 3 days before as one of the probably most beautiful areas you could be. All of a sudden is burned and in ruins. Valuable crops in the surrounding area are destroyed, and the corpses of over 10,000 men on both sides litter the streets of Gettysburg and a field that surrounds the town. That's the site 3 days later. Now, as Lee retreats back, what does Meade fail to do? Chase him. And to that point, Lincoln says, "Our army held the war in the hollow of our hand, and they could not close it. Still, I am very grateful to Meade and the great service he did at Gettysburg." But again, Meade failed to advance and run the rebels back to Richmond and try to end the war. That was so frustrating for President Lincoln, you couldn't believe it. Now, we'll set up tomorrow by just saying that 4 months later, on November 19th, 1963, Lincoln gave a brief and moving speech at the dedication of the National Cemetery in Gettysburg, known in history as Gettysburg Address. Now, does anybody have any questions? Listen up, here's what we're doing tomorrow. Right off the bat, we're going to watch a video. It will take a majority of the period, and then we're going to move back to the Western Theater and talk about the Battle of Vicksburg.